Hello, everybody. It is I, Kaara Kiddoe. I am here today. I am live on Authentic Marriages on Instagram as well as on YouTube. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about trauma and how it impacts your relationships, right? So, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Um, we're just about getting started. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, just drop it in the chat and I'd be happy to answer it now or maybe in another live that we do later on. Today, I wanted us to talk about trauma. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I specialize in working with individuals who've experienced trauma as well as couples. So, trauma is something that I see often, and it's something that I see a lot of in relationships. But my first question to you guys is do you know what trauma is? Right? Like trauma is kind of like this big word that gets kind of thrown around a lot. And I don't think a lot of us have a good working definition of trauma. And we tend to limit the definition of trauma to things that are really big and obvious and things that, you can see, such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, right? Going out into war. Those are kind of like those big ticket items, domestic violence, alcohol and drug abuse, um, parental abuse, like spousal abuse. There's like so many things that kind of falls under the realm of trauma that you can experience, right? And I want you guys to also consider that trauma is not just something bad that has happened to you, but trauma can also be the absence of something good that should have happened but didn't happen, right? And that's oftentimes like kind of one of my things that I like to enlighten my clients on, because a lot of people come to me thinking that, hey, like I had a great family, both my parents were married, I don't really have any trauma, life was great, I had a normal childhood. And then as we continue to talk, I'm like, yeah, like, let's redefine what normal is, right? Like, we may need to redefine some things here, because you just don't know. Like, a fish doesn't know that it's in water, right? Like, it's always been in water, it's always lived in water. So the fish is not going to know that there is such a thing as water. And I think sometimes that's true for a lot of us, that we actually don't know what trauma is, because it's something that we've kind of lived and breathed, and it just become like kind of part of the fabric of our lives, right? And so trauma is not only like the bad things that have happened to you, both big and small. It doesn't have to be a catastrophic, right? Leo, yes, it is another way of looking at it, right? Like trauma doesn't have to be this big catastrophic thing that has happened to you. It can actually be something as small as, or simple, I wouldn't say small because it's actually a big deal, but something as simple as, I didn't have like a nurturing mother. Like my mother was like very critical, or my father was very critical, or my father was just absent altogether and not even present. Or my father was physically present but not emotionally present. So I didn't even get like attention, like positive attention. The only time I got attention was when I did something wrong, or when I was being criticized, or when I was being told or reprimanded or something like that, right? And so what ends up happening in a lot of those situations is that what was missing was nurturing, was love, like just basic stuff, right? Like just positive attention, positive affirmation. Sometimes that's how we get our value. We end up getting our value, or we end up seeking our value, I should say, from external things, because it's like our parents sort of like pointed out um, our accomplishments, right? Or they pointed out, or they noticed us when we did well, in school, or we performed well in like some type of extracurricular activity. Like those are the kind of like performance based things. But in the absence of those performance based things, were you acceptable just as you are? Were you good enough just as you are? Were you able to fail, so to speak? Were you able to be just average? Were you able to be normal? And that was good enough, right? And a lot of us in our childhood, we've never really gotten like those messages unintentionally, because I don't think like a lot of our parents necessarily set out to intentionally do these things, or not provide these things, right? Like not provide nurturing and encouragement and affirmation. It's just like they didn't get it either. And so it's something that has been like kind of passed on. And but in the absence of that, it has a big effect on us, because every human being on this earth who is born and alive and breathing needs nutrients. That is a need, right? Like that is a big deal. That is a big thing for us to like need that. So that's an example of like unidentified trauma that a lot of us have been walking around with unbeknownst to us, right? Like we have this big gaping hole basically in our hearts that we're walking around with, and we are just unaware. We're just unaware that this is a thing and this is something that we're missing, right? So one of the things that I wanted us to consider, I want you to consider, is, are you even aware of your own trauma? Right? Like do you come to the table saying like, hey, I know like I didn't have like a good upbringing, or I know that certain things in my childhood were missing, and there are certain things that therefore trigger me, or things that I am very sensitive to because of these things that were missing? Are you that person? Are you that person that is aware of that, and by extension working on it? Or are you sort of just like wandering through life like a fish in water, not knowing that it's in water, right? Like not knowing that this is something that has been missing, and this is something that I might need to look into, I might need to talk about, I might need to explore further. So this is what happens a lot of times now. By the time we start couples therapy, or by the time I have a couple that has started working with me, what ends up happening is that, because I look at things through a trauma lens with a lot of my couples, I am sort of able to see or identify things that they may not readily identify, or they may not readily know, right? That is missing in their relationship, and how their traumas are basically interacting with each other. And a lot of times, I would say the majority of times, most people are unaware. Like most people are really unaware of the wounds that they carry, the sensitive spots that they carry, the raw spots that they carry. And therefore, they are also unaware of how their partner triggers them, or how they trigger their partner, vice versa. Right. And so, one of the things I want you guys to understand is that by nature of living, being a human being, by nature of having lived past the age of 5, you probably have raw spots. You have probably developed raw spots in your life, wounds from early childhood, intentionally and a lot of times unintentionally, that you have developed from a very young age, that is now showing up in the present. And this is how something, and I don't want to say simple because it really isn't simple, because our childhood and our family of origin and stuff like that can be really complex. But this is how something that the word isn't simple, but more so something that has gone unnoticed for so long. This is how something that has gone unnoticed for so long, our lack of nurturing in our childhood upbringing, for example, can show up in our relationships. And when I say relationships, I mean all relationships, from marriage to parenting, to how you see yourself as an employee, or if you're self-employed, how imposter syndrome might set in. Those different things, like this is how like they're all interconnected, right? Like they're all super interconnected. And so how does your trauma impact your relationship? Do you know? Are you aware? Are you aware of your raw spots to even begin to have a conversation with your partner about how these things have impacted you? Because chances are, like a lot of the couples that I see, they don't have the words to describe their internal experiences. So what ends up happening is that when we are triggered, which that's again human. Like if you've lived, if you're living, if you're breathing, you will be triggered. There will be something that will bother you. There will be something that will touch that raw spot inside of you. So that's perfectly normal and perfectly understandable because we're human beings, right? So if you're triggered, but you don't have the words to describe what is happening, if you don't have the awareness to understand what is this trigger, where is it coming from, what is it touching up against, what is it rubbing up against, what is it that is that is causing me to feel this like eruption of emotions inside of me, therefore this reaction that then other people see externally, because it's always like happening all at the same time. It's like I'm triggered and we go from 0 to 100 like very fast. And the range of emotions or the range of ways that we could react to our triggers can go from anything from like shutting down, becoming numb, silent, just walking away, exiting a room, to becoming very loud, becoming aggressive, becoming angry, critical, blaming, um, explaining, defensive. There's just a number of ways that we can respond when we're sad, overwhelmed with emotion, crying. Like there's just a lot of ways that we can respond when we're triggered. But chances are that if you are in a committed relationship, you would have probably experienced a lot of triggers. The intensity of the triggers that you experience in a committed relationship is oftentimes greater and more significant than the triggers that you might experience at work or that you might experience in a platonic friendship. And that's because your partner has access to your heart, and your partner is the closest person to you. Your partner can love you in a way that nobody else can, but it can also hurt you in a way that no one else can, right? So this is just something to be aware of. So what ends up happening in relationships is when we clash and my trauma rubs up against your trauma, and then there is this combustion that happens and this crazy cycle that might take place where we escalate, or one person escalates and one person is like offline, right? Like one person is like very intense, angry, frustrated, critical, saying a lot of things, throwing a lot of words out there. Even sometimes it might be very like it almost becomes like an out of body sort of experience where you're acting outside of yourself, or you come outside of yourself, you come outside of who you know you to be. You are even like shocked by your response because it is so big and it is so great that it takes you as like, wow, like I don't even like myself when I'm like this, right? And on the flip side, for the folks that might have an opposite response, so there's the ones that have like very big responses, and then there's the ones that it's big but it's internal. So we don't actually get to see the volcano that's erupting inside of them. What we do see is them walking away or shutting down, and it could look like, on the outside looking in, it could look like they don't care. It could look like they're checked out. It could look like they don't care about you or they don't care about the relationship. But in fact, what is happening is the same thing that's happening to you is happening to them, but it's on the inside. So they are like combusting on the inside. They're erupting on the inside. They're feeling a fury of emotions on the inside. Just a lot of pain, a lot of sadness, a lot of rejection, a lot of fear, a lot of abandonment. Those tend to be kind of like one of those core emotions is usually what happens when we're triggered. And that's usually what's happening on the inside. So you might look at your partner and your partner looks numb, or they look checked out, or they look like they're here, but they're not here, or they've walked away. And to you that can come across as like they don't care. There's no way that they could care about me. There's no way that they could love me. There's no way that they can um really feel the way that I feel about them, because I'm here and I'm fighting and I'm here and I'm in the race and I'm here and I'm, telling you how I feel, and then you're over there like not saying anything. You don't have anything to say. And I think like a lot of times we need to give room, like my couples, like we need to give a lot of space to understanding that we are going to respond differently when we're triggered. Just because I shut down when I'm triggered does not mean that I don't care about you, or does not mean that I don't love you. It means that I'm in pain. It means that I'm hurting. It means that I'm sad, or I'm alone, or I feel rejected, or I feel abandoned. Like you've just hit just a core spot inside of me that really, really hurts. And on the converse, just because I'm wild and crazy and I'm loud and I'm shouting and I'm calling you names, or I'm doing the most, like just because I'm doing that also may not mean that I don't love you, or I don't care about you, I don't care about us. It could mean that you rubbed up on a really raw spot inside of me, and that trauma piece is what is showing up right now. And a lot of times in relationships, we tend to fight about the surface problems that we could see, or the initial thing that caused the trigger. The initial, okay, so you took this water bottle and you moved it from here to there, and that upset me. And now we're talking about the water bottle, and now we need to talk about why you don't listen to me, and and this is how you need to fix it. And what that ends up doing is that we have missed the boat. Like we have missed the whole boat, the plane, the spaceship. Like we missed the whole thing, right? Like when we start to focus on the surface level problems, that is usually not very helpful. And it usually just misses everything that you're feeling and experiencing in that moment. It usually misses your heart. It usually misses the core emotions that you're actually feeling because of the trigger. And because we don't have the words to describe our internal, what's happening on the inside, it's almost like the only thing that we could do is fight, flight, or freeze. So think about when we have a trauma response, or we're triggered, and our trigger causes us to react in a way that is outside of our characters. It takes us outside of our body. It takes us to a whole different place. When we have a trigger like that, there is something that it's hitting at the core, and therefore we are going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. So either you're a fighter and you do that with your words, you do that, you defend yourself, you get critical, you say things, you're just really, really good with words, and you might be really verbal, and that's like fight. Flight would be you exit stage left, and it doesn't mean that you're not a person that don't use your words either. It means that you might be more like a snapping turtle, right? Like you might be more like of a rah, 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 I say what I say, and then I shut down and I withdraw, right? So with withdrawing or fleeing doesn't mean that you do so quietly also, right? Like there are some withdrawals that do so quietly, and then there are other withdrawals that do so very dramatically. And either way, though, it is a flee response. It is let me get the heck out of here because this doesn't feel good. And I need to leave, and I need to go before something else happens, or before something worse happens, before I say something or do something where I'm really like called outside of myself. And so that's fleeing. And then freezing, in this case of like a relationship, might look like becoming really numb. It might look like shutting down, but you're not feeling anything. Like you have just sort of like numbed yourself out because it's easier in that moment to just be numb and to not feel, as opposed to taking everything that's like coming at you, like all the emotions that are coming at you. So basically, when you are triggered, you will go into fight, flight, or freeze. That is a normal human response if you're human. Like you cannot escape that. You cannot take a shortcut and not go into fight, flight, or freeze. You cannot retrain your brain to say, okay, brain, when I'm threatened, please don't send the troops out to protect me. Because that is the purpose of your fight, flight, or freeze response. Your purpose of your fight, flight, or freeze response is to protect you. It is to keep you safe. This is a God-given response to danger. Like we were created this way. We were born with a fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So to try to get rid of it is like so counterintuitive to the purpose that it serves. So what is helpful, one, is to understand that this is a human response: to fight, to run away, or to freeze. That's number one. Number two, it's important to understand why. Why am I fighting? Or why am I running? Or why am I freezing? I want you to do that without judgment. I want you to do that without labeling it as this is bad. Like it is bad when I fight, it is bad when I freeze, or it is, or you who are fighting is worse than me because I take the better way or the more holy way or the better way out by simply, saying, okay, I won't say anything now. I'll just, exit stage left, right? Like that feels more holy and pious and good. And to the person who is being like critical and angry and loud and stuff like that, they're being bad, right? And so I would really love for us to sort of like remove those labels of like who is right and who is wrong, because the truth is both positions are unhelpful to the relationship, but helpful to you. Does that make sense? Because it's like, it's helpful for me from the perspective of like, I'm protecting myself in this moment. That's why I'm going into fight, flight, or freeze, because there was something that was communicated that does not make me feel safe. And because it doesn't make me feel safe, I need to protect myself. So I will automatically choose one of the three options. How I choose to fight, or how I choose to flight, or how I choose to flee might look different from person to person, but the objective is the same. The purpose is the same. I am doing this because I do not feel emotionally safe and I need to protect myself. And so that's what I'm going to do. And this is where I would like for us to sort of try as best as we can to be very non judgmental and replace that judgment with curiosity, because this is where our hearts get missed. This is where your heart, your thoughts, your feelings, like all of those things that are happening on the inside, never get seen if we just look to talk about why did you move this water bottle and put it over there and not over here, right? Like if we just talk about the water bottle, then we actually don't get to talk about your heart. We don't get to talk about what's under there. Why does that matter? Like why is that a thing? Like what exactly did this water bottle trigger for you to react so strongly, right? It might seem like the water bottle is not a big deal and it's really small and it's so insignificant that this shouldn't be an issue. But if it is, and it did cause a trigger response, then your duty is just to be curious. Be curious and be non judgmental with that curiosity. Do not label anything right or wrong. Do not attribute, defamation of character to yourself or to your partner, but just be really curious, because there's a lot of us walking around with trauma that you didn't even know you had. Your partner may have trauma that they don't know that they have, that might be obvious to you but not obvious to them. You have trauma that you may not know that you had. And if you're sitting here thinking, "Oh, I don't have trauma because I like grew up in a really great home and I had perfect parents, and even though I know like they did like one or two things that was like really offensive, like I'm good for it." Like if that's you, I would implore you to be more introspective, and I would implore you to be more curious, right? Because even that position is sort of like a power up or a one up position to your partner, because that essentially is saying, I'm better than you. I don't have any trauma. You're the problem and you need to be fixed. And if you are tangoing with each other, if you are triggering each other, meaning that not only are they triggered, but their response triggers you, then it means that there is something inside that it's rubbing up on, right? And I'm a strong believer in like, if you live past the age of 5, you've lived long enough to experience something bad. You've lived long enough to experience something bad happening to you, to leave a raw spot or to leave a hole in your heart or to leave this gaping wound inside of you that can really continue forever, right? And so I want us to just really be compassionate. Like I think like that's one of my biggest take home messages for a lot. I've been telling a lot of my clients this week, last week, like, listen, we need to work on self compassion. We need to work on giving ourselves grace so that we could give other people grace. We need to understand our own traumas so that we could have the mindset of understanding other people's traumas. So that if I take care of myself, if I give myself permission to understand myself, to be curious with myself, to understand, like, why do I act wild and crazy when I'm triggered? Like, what's that about? Like, I don't think of myself as wild and crazy, but like, like when I'm triggered, I might act wild and crazy, right? Like, let's just take the label off of that, right? Like, let's just take the labels off of it. Let's just take it's good, it's bad, or whatever, right or wrong, it's sin, it's not sin. Okay. Like, whatever the case is, like giving it a bad label and shaming yourself or shaming your partner is not the solution. And it will likely not help you, and it will likely not make you feel any better, right? So if you can give yourself curiosity in those moments, then you can also do that for your partner. If you give yourself self compassion, that you then have the capacity to give your partner self compassion. Oftentimes, what I have found with a lot of my clients who experience trauma or who have these trauma wounds is that they end up feeling a lot of their core negative beliefs is somewhere along the line of I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, it's my fault, I am the bad guy, right? And that is what you are up against when you're triggered. You're not up against the situation that triggered it, even though you spend so much time and energy trying to dissect the problem that you see on the surface. What you don't talk about and what you don't see is the wounds that that trauma tells me. That trigger is what is telling me I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough, right? Like that's what that trigger is telling you. And that's what you're fighting about. Because when you are triggered, you start to hear as if your partner is saying, I don't love you. You are not good enough. You are the scum of the earth and you mean nothing to me. That is what you hear through the cycle, through the triggers. That's what you end up hearing. And that doesn't feel good. That feels really low. That feels really sad. That feels like a rejection to who you are as a human being. And so, yeah, your brain is going to get triggered into fight, flight, or freeze when that happens because now you're not safe. Now you're not emotionally safe. And that hurts, right? And so, when you're triggered, if you are triggered in your relationship or in general, it doesn't even have to be with your partner, it could just be in general. I invite you to be curious and to practice non judgmental curiosity for yourself and offer yourself self compassion in that moment, because that means that you are acknowledging and bringing into awareness that there is a wound that this trigger is rubbing up on. And I need to give that attention. I need to give that some loving kindness. I need to give that a lot of grace. I need to give myself a lot of grace. And if we start practicing that for ourselves, we then have the capacity to give that to our partners. All right, friends, that's all I have for you today. But if you have any questions, if you have any comments, definitely drop it in the chat or shoot me a DM. I would love to hear from you. And if you have any ideas for future topics that you would like for us to discuss, shoot me a DM and let me know. Bye, guys.